Let's talk about reparation. Rembrandt, Vermeer, Host, Vondel, Bredero. Those are artists and writers known around the world from Holland's golden age. The golden age, this is how Dutch like to boast and brag about the 17th century. It was a period in the history of the Netherlands in which art, trade, economy, and science flourished. The 17th century was an era of great wealth, and Holland became the most economic power in the world. The Golden Age has also a dark side in which the negative aspects, such as poverty, war, forced labor, and human trafficking, are ignored. Holland was one of the multinational corporations. Holland had two multinational corporations, the Dutch East India, the so-called UOC, and the West India Company, the WIC, a great colonial power. Under the domain of the UOC, Holland had the current Malaccas, part of Java and Indonesia, part of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the actual South Africa, part of India, part of Taiwan, part of Malaysia. Under the domain of the WIC, Holland had Arguin, an island on the coast of Mauritania, Curacao, Aruba, Bonaire, part of Angola, part of Brazil, the actual Guyana and Suriname, part of Ghana, the actual Virgin Islands, the actual New York, part of Tobago, St. Martin, St. Eustatius, Saba, part of Benin, Togo, and Nigeria. Without the colonies and conquered territories exploited by Holland, without the robberies, piracy, and human trafficking, there wouldn't have been a golden age, base for all the wealth still to be seen today. What about an official apology and reparation for all the territories, communities, and people that you have exploited? What about showing some regret instead of living comfortably and enjoying the billions and billions you have robbed and then trying to justify that it was just another era? Where is the continuity of governance and the continuity of monarchy? Enough of twisting the truth. Enough with injustice. Let's talk seriously about reparation. That is a poem. It's a combination of a poem and an article I wrote this year. I welcome you all to our to today's meeting with the topic reparations and the role of United Nations and CARICOM. A special welcome to our speakers of today, Professor Vereen Shepherd, Mr. Sikia Thomas, Dr. Carlisle Corbin, and not to forget Mr. James Finis. Also, welcome to all that are following us. And I like to acknowledge the Caribbean Progressive Alliance, founded by Nosquier Bonet Rubec, we won Bonet back in March of 2017, and the annual conference group consisting of Guyana, French territories, Guyanese human rights organizations, and movement for decolonization and social emancipation from Curacao, Dutch territories, Pueblo Soberano, and Movimento Causa Prome, and Corsao Fuerte Autonomo. From Aruba, Mr. Rudy Cruz as Vice President of COPAL from the Dutch territories. From St. Martin, the Independent St. Martin Foundation, St. Martin Independence Group for the Dutch and French territories. St. Eustatius People's Labour Party as a political party, and also Brighter Path Foundation. From Bonaire, Nosque Bonaire Rubec, and Bonaire Human Rights Organization. From San Andres and Providencia, Santa Catalina, Racial Nation Organizations as a Colombia colony. From Grenada, Grenada Human Rights Organizations. From Puerto Rico, Compañeros Unidos. From Virgin Islands, US, PAIR, ANC, Caribbean Pan-African Network. From Bermuda, the British territories. Welcome. My name is Sydney Martin, and I will be your Master of Ceremony for today. I would like to present Mrs. Davika Cesar from Bonaire Human Rights Organization and Chair Organizing Committee for a few words. Mrs. Davika.
Thank you, Sydney. Welcome, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone, our other guests, to our annual symposium. This is our 5th annual symposium. On the tiny island of Bonaire, we started with modest means our first symposium. Initially, our mentor, Dr. Carlisle Corbin, initiated and requested and encouraged us to do a first symposium. So we had our first symposium, which Dr. Caroline Corbin and 10 islands spoke in our conference. And from thereafter, we have five. Today is the fifth symposium. We are very, very, very happy and honored to have all of you. Now we have grown to 13 countries and islands in every British, French, Dutch, Colombia, US colonies. We call ourselves, some of us are bound to the colonizer, and some of us are not. So this conference is, is an initiative to bond with each other in all the islands. So what we saw in the last 5 years give us an indication that we all share the common goal, same goals and the same tragedies, the same heartaches, the same injustice. What we couldn't do before, we are now doing. We're united. We have different languages. We have different cultures. We have no connecting flights. We are a tiny little island across the sea from our brothers and sisters in the Eastern Caribbean, which gives us a big disadvantage. Not only there's no connecting flights, but there is a language barrier. Our islands speak Papimento, or sometimes Dutch. Everything is being covered up. Same as our brothers in Guyana, Cayenne, French Guyana. They're far away. So here we are after 5 years with 14 islands and countries together from different colonies. I know some of us say we're not colonies, but you know, I would say is that there will be a day when we can say that freely. So without being too political, I want to welcome everyone to our conference. And with that, I would like to show a small trailer of our cause. Thank you.
Place ourselves in danger to one degree or another when we stand up. But we place our children and grandchildren in even greater danger where we don't.
The book Benair Self-Determination Denied will reveal the atrocities committed against the Benair people, the social inequality, the oppression of their rights, and the suppression of their culture on Benair. Imposed laws, policies, regulations, and taxes rob the people of their natural food resources and inherited land and leave them destitute. Local Bonaireans, now a shrunken displaced population, had become a minority group on their own island in less than a decade. This book, Benair Self-Determination Denied, will further shine light, desecrate and encapsulate the persons, politicians, leaders, the players, their actions, all that led to the betrayal and annexation of the Benair peoples on October 10, 2010 going forward towards October 10, 2020.
These are names of politicians and leaders that played a role in the breaking up of the Netherlands Antilles on October 10, 2010. Alexander Pechtold, Atso Nicolai, Henk Bijleveld, Etienne Ice, Emily, Ramesito Bui, Bernie, Janchi Dortalina, Anthony Nicholas, Jopi Abraham, Raimundo Saleh, Maricela Crows, Evert PR, McKeel Bay Kirk, Nachi Willem, Hans Els, Clark Abraham, Elvis Sheena Shu, Arthur Seeley, Boy Antoine, Hank Kemp, Stolte, Hans Hillen, Glenn, Goday, Richard Hart, Fritz Gode Gedrag, Hamie Saleh and others. The book Bonaire Self-Determination Denied will summarize We Want Bonaire Back, trajectory to relist Bonaire back on the non-self-governing territories list of the United Nations that begun in 2016, where Mr. James Phineas as first Antillean to speak in the Special Committee on Decolonization. Because as history shows, only international exposure can free our people and guarantee the right of self-determination to the whole Dutch colonies in the Caribbean, St. Eustatius, Saba, Bonaire, Aruba, Curaçao and St. Martin.
I now invite Mr. Puerto Rico for his welcome words. Jose Lopez, also from the organizing committee.
Yeah, hello. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Jose Lopez Sierra from Bayamón, Puerto Rico, and I'm here to welcome everyone to this very important symposium, the fifth symposium, The Political Future, the Right of Self-Determination and Reparation of the Caribbean and South America. Welcome everyone, and I hope this will be very informative and very important for us to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. I will now introduce you to Mr. James Phineas, host and human rights activist. First, I will tell you very short something about Mr. Phineas, Mr. James Phineas. Mr. James Phineas is president of Nosque Bonaire Back. We Want Bonaire Back NGO. He is a young professional, or I should say, he was a young professional commercial banker and past president of NGO platform. And he abandoned his professional life and turned human rights activist full-time, where he started to lobby the Dutch government to be transparent and accountable in his governance of the people of Bonaire for the past 18, 19 years. Mr. Phineas noted what he calls the new wave of European recolonization of the Caribbean and the Americas, bribing and blackmailing our people. As part of his activism, he demonstrated in the rain and sun without leaving, sleeping outside Bonaire's governor's office in 2014 till 2015 for 8 months, demanding a referendum so that the people can choose their own future. After the dissolution of the Netherlands Antilles on 10 of October 2010, the people was forced to be part of Holland without equal rights. James Phineas sacrificed himself for his country, for his island, and the people to get a referendum in which he succeeded. On the 18th of December of 2015, the government of Bonaire had no choice but to give in and hold a referendum in order for Mr. Phineas to stop protesting and go home. In that referendum, the people of Bonaire voted overwhelmingly a 65% rejecting the present illegal constitutional status of Bonaire. However, instead of respecting the wishes of a nation, Holland's parliament decided to annex and embed it, anchor Bonaire and its people into the Dutch constitution with unequal rights, whilst the politicians in the Netherlands Antilles and the world did nothing. I give the word to Mr. James Phillips.
Good afternoon. Welcome, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends. And I give special thanks to our special guests from today's speakers, to Professor Shepard, to Mr. Sakia Thomas, and to Dr. Carbon, who put this Sunday available to help us in this much necessary time and struggle that we are in at this moment in our history. Also, special thanks to all our friends from all the CPA group and also from all over following us this afternoon. Yes, today is another day that we come together with one objective, and this objective is to confront our common issue and common problem, big problem that we have in the Caribbean, for sure, concerning these dependency countries that are, in my view, colonies. So, but before start, we get a slogan that we get before the conference. I want to say it sounds so strong that I will repeat it again today, because maybe from there we take it on. It says we are coming for everything our ancestors were denied. And I say also again in 4 languages, because from all the different colonies, the French, the Spanish speaking, the Papiamento speaking, like us, and English speaking, for sure. Nos venons por tout ce que nos ancestors ont été refusés. Venimos por todos lo que se les negó a nuestros antepasados. Por common, this is for our real friends, good friends, por common, voor alles wat onze voorouders werden geweigerd. In our language, Papiamento, nos tabing at turcos award kita for the nos ancestor nan. That is our message. That is our message. That we will keep saying till we get everything. And reparations, I think, is a very good tool, a very good road to that, to get everything they give us. They take away from our ancestors and deny us up to date. Today, I'm gonna speak about, I wanna decide part of our assessment of self-governance sufficiency in conformity with internationally recognized standards of country Bonaire. This assessment of our investigation was done to prove that we are a colony. Yesterday in our conference, I thanked the Mr. I think it was Wilson, who had a comment. He said, I hear you all speak, you are showing some kind of victim syndrome. I didn't react yesterday because I see that it was, but today I'm gonna say something about it. Victim syndrome, reparations. I think that they are very linked to each other. Yes, victim. To have a victim, a crime has to be committed, right? Yes, to be a victim, there's a crime before a victim, or they go together. So, so far I know, the United Nations declared colonialism as crime against humanity. So that Mr. was right yesterday. It's not a syndrome. We are victims at this moment. We are living in colonies, and that's a crime against humanity. We are the victim of a crime at this moment. It's not a syndrome. We're living it. So I step back a little bit and cool down a little bit because this is very heavy for us, but we will go slowly with it, continue forward because, yes. And how you prove a crime? If we live in it every day as nobody thinks it's normal. We're living in a crime scene of a crime situation every day we wake up in our colonies because colonialism is crime against humanity. So I thank him very much for yesterday because he made me think. I had time to think. So now I'm saying this today. So thank you. So we have to do something about that. If it's a crime, we have to stop that. Maybe we can stop it alone. That's why today, everything, more people will hear us. I think we have help from two big people from the Caribbean, Dr. Shepard and Mr. Sakia. I think they will help us to get this message further because we have to stop this crime. And how we prove it? We needed to prove because they think we're okay, they think we are happy on Bonaire, we think we are, everything's fine. No, we are not living in a democracy, we're not living in an equality or a state of as we heard it before already today, a couple of times. So for that, we had to prove this crime. And we got a group of experts to conduct our investigation and to report to prove this crime. And it's called the Assessment of Self-Government Sufficient in Conformity with Internationally Recognized Standards for Country Bonaire. So that's how we're gonna prove ourselves that we're a colony, and then we can maybe get a help to get us out to stop this crime that are committed to us. But it's not only for us, for all our brothers and sisters who spoke yesterday, they are in the same situation as Bonaire. So this is, I'm gonna summarize this study, this assessment. It took us over 2 years to raise the funds on Bonaire to pay for it. It's the people pay for it. The people help us get it. It was $1, $2 fundraising to get it done. So I will read it in honor of the Bonairean people who fight for this. So the summary is about the political, economic, and social inequality that continues to linger at the end of the first decade and of the entering into force of the public entity status of Bonaire. That is our situation. They've been embedded in the Dutch constitution as a public entity against the will of the Bonairean people, against a referendum that rejected this completely. It says the right of self-determination. On that point, the assessment determined that the process was tantamount to unilateral annexation and violative of the inalienable rights of the people of Bonaire to self-determination and counter to the international legal principle of ex injuria just non oritur. So unjust acts cannot create law. They say we are legally in the constitution of the Dutch constitution, but it's not illegal. So how can it be a law? That's what I understand. The assessment is that the imposition of the States of Bonaire amounted to an involuntary annexation through partial integration of people in the large state without formal consent, against their express will, and irrespective of the applicability of international law on self-determination, which has clearly been circumvented. That is what is about of the law. And the part of applicability of laws, the assessment specified that on the public entity status, the Dutch government has the unilateral authority to decide which extent laws and regulations would be applied and which would not. And there was a decidedly insufficient consultation process in place to regulate such imposition. That is happening with us on Bonaire. And we are being integrated. And on this point, an equal status of right and citizenship. Assessment found that the public entity status of Bonaire also fell short with a lack of direct political representation within the Dutch Second Chamber. And from the perspective of economic equality, the assessment noted that the geographic, cultural, and other differences between the Caribbean and European parts of the kingdom were being used to justify the significantly lower labor standards than those enjoyed in the European part. In this regard, it has been kept low by our side, and the other side is higher. That is what's happening to us. The another part is that it highlighted also the important social impacts of the immigration from European Netherlands on the demographic of the composition of Bonaire. So we became a minority, as we saw, in less than a decade. We are less than 40% of the population now. And if not stopped, then we won't have a future. Our future is to be disappearing as it's going now. So that's why today we make a plea to everyone that help us stop this crime. Because if crime has some components, one is the one who commits it and who is accomplished with. So in that sense, we send our message out. Hope it will be here across the globe and anywhere. We need your help. The people of Bonaire are in the state of being to be disappeared in some decades coming if this crime is not being stopped. So I realize I'm going too far. The time is up. So thank you for having our story heard, and thank you for sharing it further across. And I will be there later. If any questions, I will be willing to answer. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Finis. Thank you. I will now introduce Professor Vereen Shepherd. Professor Vereen Shepherd is a social historian and current director of the Center of Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies. She holds the Bachelor of Arts and the Master of Philosophy in History from the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, and a PhD from the University of Cambridge. She researches Jamaican economic history, slavery, reparation, and gender discourses in Caribbean history. She is the author of several books about slavery, culture, emancipation, and post-colonial Jamaica and Jamaica's social development. Our most recent book, published this year by the UWI Press, is a biography of Dr. Lucille Maturin Mar. The UWI Press also published her Maharani's Misery, Narratives of a Passage from India to the Caribbean. Professor Shepard is host of Talking History on Nationwide 90 FM, a member of the National Council on Reparation of Jamaica, vice chair of the CARICOM Reparation Commission, and a vice chair of the United Nations Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Among her awards are the Order of Distinction, Commander Class from the Government of Jamaica, the Africa Studies Distinguished Award from Florida International University, and the 217 UWI Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Public Service. She was one of the 70+7 women honored for service to the UWI during the UW's 70th anniversary celebrations, as well as one of the 60 women of distinction honored by the Jamaica Dinner in 2020. She recently won the President's Award at the St. Martin Book Fair. Professor Varine Shepard.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your warm welcome. Greetings, everyone. So as you have heard, I am a member of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And last year, I was tasked with following the proceedings of the Special Committee on the situation with regard to the implementation of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. The reason this is of interest to the committee that I'm on is that the preamble to the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which we will call the ICERD, states as follows, as you can see on the slide coming up now. And if you could just change that slide, please, to slide 2. Considering that the United Nations has condemned colonialism and all practices of segregation and discrimination associated therewith in whatever form and wherever they exist, and that the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, 14th December 1960, General Resolution 1514-15 has affirmed and solemnly claimed the necessity of bringing them to a speedy and unconditional end. And then it goes on. I'm sorry, the slide has not changed. If you could, the person who is helping me with the slide, could you change the slide, please?
Okay, it's changing on one section, it's going too slow. So give me a moment.
Okay. Well, I'll have to continue because I don't want to lose the time. Anyway, so having set that out, the the convention then sets out the grounds that constitute racial discrimination and the measures that states that are parties or signatories to the convention must take to eliminate racial discrimination. Yes, this slide is good because how does the United Nations define trustee and non-self-governing territories, and what territories fall under the UN's list of trustee and the non-self-governing territories? Well, you can see the way in which it is defined there. So the non-self-governing territories are defined as territories whose people have not yet attained a full measure of self-government. And in the third paragraph, you see that today they have only isolated 17 countries in this group. And if you look on the next slide, you will see the list that the UN has under its watch in terms of non-self-governing countries. And then there are two maps which will show you generally where these countries are located. So if you scroll down just to the two maps so that people can get an idea of where those countries are located. Now, it's quite clear that not all countries that you know of that are non-independent are on this map. So you have seen. Now, under chapter 11 of the Charter of the United Nations, the non-self-governing territories, as I said, are defined as you have seen. You have seen the list, the 17 countries, you have seen the two maps. But you will notice, if you look at slide 7, you will notice that several countries with which we are concerned today are not on that list, which is a reason that the UN list is controversial. So if you go down to slide 7, sorry, go back to slide 7. Yes, there we go. You will see that these countries are considered non-independent by many people, but it is not many of them they're not on the UN list. So having said that though, it is quite clear from Article 15 of the International Convention that the committee has an interest in the welfare of non-independent countries. So here is what Article 15 says, and you can see that on slide 8. Pending the achievement of the objectives of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples contained in General Assembly Resolution 1514-15 of 14th December 1960, the provisions of this convention shall in no way limit the right of petition granted to these peoples by other international instruments or by the UN and its specialized agencies. One question is whether the CERD considers that not to promote independence is the result of racial discrimination. And I'm sure that's a question that you ask yourselves all the time. So this is a question which non-independent territories will have to consider, because here is how Article 1 defines racial discrimination. And you can look at the next slide. So Article 1 defines racial discrimination as any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin, which has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. So to return to Article 15 of the ICERD, and you can look at the next few slides. So under 15.2, the committee established under Article 8, which we call the Decolonization Committee for short, shall receive petitions and submit these for an opinion to our committee. And so we must get those reports from that committee. And slide 10 continues, 15B. the committee shall receive from the competent bodies of the United Nations copies of the reports, and so that we can have an opinion and return that opinion to the General Assembly. And the next slide, number 15.3 says, the committee shall include in its report to the General Assembly a summary of the petitions and reports it has received from UN bodies and the expressions of opinion and recommendations of the committee relating to the said petitions and reports. And then number 4, 15.4 says, the committee shall request from the Secretary General of the United Nations all information relevant to the objectives of this convention and available to him, I suppose, or her, regarding the territories mentioned. Now, because Article 15 of the convention empowers my committee to consider copies of petitions, reports, and other information relating to these territories, we routinely, and that's why I was tasked with preparing the report, make this report in our annual report. And the annual report is public, so you can actually go to the CERD website and have a look at that. Now, I'm not ready for that one. We can stay on the one before for a while. So this is what we summarize in the latest report. And I'll just read the last paragraph. So we have said the committee reiterated that the right to self-determination is an inalienable right of the people in non-self-governing territories. That's what the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination said. And we remind everyone that this is in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations and the General Assembly resolution containing the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, and remains the fundamental principle with regard to decolonization. And the committee calls on the administrative powers to intensify their efforts to address the socioeconomic inequalities in non-self-governing territories of which petitioners complain. So you see that the UN committee is concerned with the same issues, and you are concerned with those issues. You outlined those issues a while ago. So what protection can the CERD offer to countries that fall under Article 15? Well, as we said, we study the reports that the special committee gets. We read especially the petitions from the different territories. We identify and assess any complaints of racial discrimination that complainants bring to the special committee. We identify any attempts by the state to block movements towards independence or decolonization, and we submit our views to the General Assembly. At the end of the day, the committee reiterates that the right to self-determination is an inalienable right of the people in non-self-governing territories. So what you can do is to ensure that when your country, when the colonizing country is coming before the committee, you submit an alternative report to the committee, to us, so that we can ask questions to the state. So NGOs, CSOs, and activists, that is your responsibility. From the perspective of this Center for Reparation Research, of which I'm the director, political independence is the right of all non-independent territories, whatever they are called by the administering power, overseas departments, unincorporated territories, internally self-governing territories, whatever. They are, from our point of view, colonies. And some have tried to follow the rules in getting independence by putting the question to a referendum. But you know you need about 2/3 majority of your people to say you want independence. And this is what is trapping some of these countries under colonialism, because the people themselves will not vote for independence. And some of the powers say, the administering powers like New Zealand would say, well, they're willing to grant independence, but how will Tokelau, for example, manage on its own? However, the Center for Reparation Research also holds firm to the view that there should be no independence without reparation. You must not negotiate independence without a reparatory justice package. or a golden handshake, if that is what colonizing powers wish to call it. The British Caribbean did not succeed in their negotiations with the British for a proper package, even though, from what Professor Hilary Beckles tells us, the Asian colonies were able to get what is called the Colombo Plan. They got a leg up. But when Norman Manley, Sir Alexander Bustamante, Edward Seaga, Eric Williams tried to negotiate something similar, they were turned down and got pittance. And you can see the effect of that today. So you know what to avoid. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that Sir Ellis Clark from Trinidad and Tobago made this very observation in 1964. He says, an administering power is not entitled to extract for centuries all that can be got out of a colony. And when that has been done, to relieve itself of its obligations by the conferment of a formal but meaningless because it cannot possibly be supported political independence. Justice requires that reparation be made to the country that has suffered the ravages of colonialism before that country is expected to face up to the problems and difficulties that will inevitably beset it upon independence. All colonized parts of our region are entitled to reparation, and in addition, Haiti is entitled to the restitution of the sums France extracted before it would recognize Haitian independence. That is why the CARICOM Reparation Commission, established by heads of government of CARICOM in 2013, has drawn up a 10-point action plan, which you can see on the next slide. This is the reparation strategy, the 10-point action plan, the negotiating strategy. And the CARICOM Reparation Commission urges all countries in the Caribbean to establish reparation committees and to join the movement. So we're asking for a full formal apology, an Indigenous Peoples Development Program, repatriation for those who desire it, back to one's homeland, the building of cultural institutions, attention to the public health crisis, and we are seeing right now in this pandemic, the impact of not having this in place. Illiteracy eradication, an African knowledge program to reconnect us to our homeland. Psychological rehabilitation because of the impact of slavery and colonialism on our people, and the intergenerational transmission of trauma and the impact that we are seeing still today. We're asking for number 9 is technology transfer, and number 10, debt cancellation and monetary compensation. There's nothing wrong with monetary compensation. It takes cash to have a development package, which this is. In any event, we want back the compensation money that they paid to the enslavers. Now, we're into the decade for people of African descent, and as part of justice, the program of activities state clearly, acknowledging and profoundly regretting the untold suffering and evils inflicted on millions of men, women, and children as a result of slavery. The program of activities for the implementation of the decade calls on states that have not apologized and have not paid reparation to do so where appropriate for grave and massive violations committed. So the UN is also calling on states that have not apologized to do so and to find some way to contribute to the restoration of the dignity of victims. The justification for repatriatory justice had already been outlined in the Durban Declaration and Program of Action adopted by member states at the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance held in Durban, South Africa in 2001. And you can see what it says there. Historical injustices have undeniably contributed to the poverty, underdevelopment, marginalization, social exclusion, economic disparities, instability, and insecurity that affect many people in different parts of the world. So we need to continue this demand from all colonial powers despite the opposing arguments that they and their anti-reparationist supporters, including some of our own people who should be ashamed of themselves to be anti-reparationists, put forward, such as too long ago in the past, there are no living victims, slavery and the transatlantic trafficking were legal at the time, and descendants cannot claim on behalf of dead ancestors. But we know that there are arguments to counter those opposing arguments. We know a defendant or a perpetrator exists. We know that there is no denying the fact that plantation slavery provided the scaffold for Europe's industrial development. We know that there's considerable evidence of the value of enslaved people's labor to European economic development. We know that the injustice is well documented. The victims are identifiable as a group. And if there are victims, as my brother just said, then a crime was committed. The right to reparation is recognized by international law, and there is precedent for the payment of reparations. We know about the reparation to the Jews, we know Haiti had to pay France, and we know about planter compensation in the British Caribbean. We know the descendants of victimized groups continue to suffer harm to this day, and that this remains true today as the institutionalized racism of the colonial era, and that all of this has had a debilitating impact on Africans and people of African descent, on indigenous peoples, and on indentured servants too. And we know that the lawyers say that there is nothing in international law to stop the descendants of the original victims from claiming on behalf of their ancestors. And there's no statute of limitation on a crime against humanity. Our ancestors who died in the cause of Caribbean freedom and reparation deserve this fight that we, the living, can continue. And as you can, and I'm showing you some of them on these two slides, 17 and 18. These are our ancestors who fought for freedom. A leader, one Tete Loke from St. Martin, Nanny of the Maroons, and of course, so many others. We have the next slide shows some of the men, Busa, Kofi, Sam Sharp, Ignatius Sancho, Equiano, and others. Not to do so, not to join the reparation movement, not to honor our ancestors, is to condemn world civilization to a state of perpetual war, as His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I and later Bob Marley has told us. And it bears reading through until the philosophy, which holds one race superior and another inferior, is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. Everywhere is war. Until they are no longer first class and second class citizens of any nation. Until the color of a person's skin is of no more significance than the color of his or her eyes. Until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, this is a war. Until that day, the dream of lasting peace, world citizenship, and rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued, but never attained. We say reparation now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shepherd. Thank you for your presentation. I will now invite Mr. Sikia Thomas for his presentation. Mr. Sikia Thomas is founding chairman of Global African Congress. He is an executive committee member of the African and Africans Descendant World Conference Against Racism. leader, Canadian delegation to United Nations Convention on the Eradication of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. Mr. Sikia Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Vereen have laid out a very good case for reparations. Obviously, it's going to be a tall order to follow, but I will do what I can. So my sub-team tonight is to talk about the continuous quest for political decolonization in the Caribbean and South America. So let me begin by recognizing the United Nations Charter, and that is the United Nations Charter Article 73, which state, it is very clear in compelling its member state, and I quote, to develop self-government, to take due account of the political aspiration of the people, and to assist them in the progressive development of their institution. It continues, the other main goal explained in this charter is that the political, economical, social, and education development of these countries, that is in Article 74, refer to both the administrating countries and the colonies as having a similar duty in the community of nations. So in other words, by the very definition of the United Nations, it recognized that there should not be a case of colonial master and colonial subject. Yet, as we could see, some of those countries continue to treat many of the colonies as such. So I will start off by affirming that the Global African Congress stands firmly and equivocally in solidarity with the people of the Caribbean and South America in demanding an end to all forms of colonial occupation. Europe and the United States colonization in the Caribbean must come to an end. And I've identified some of those countries, but I will just go over a few of them, like in the case of the Dutch, Curacao, Bonaire, Aruba, St. Status, Saba, and St. Martin. In France, we have Martinique and Guadeloupe, Cayenne, referred to as French Guyana, and St. Martin, United States, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, the British, Montserrat, Anguilla, Cayman Islands, Turk and Caicos, and British Island, and the Malvinas Island. All are countries under the occupation of Europe and the United States. Today's symposium focused on the Dutch colony. And for that, I want to congratulate our brothers and sisters who have chose to shed some light and put some emphasis on this extremely extraordinary, urgent question. So as we focus on the Dutch colonies in the Caribbean, our comrades from Bonaire demand that the future could be nothing else than a consolidated independent nation with complete sovereignty and the right to self-determination and reparation. So let us state the obvious. The very premise of the urgent arrangement under which Bonaire, administered by the Dutch monarchy, is questionable. And I say it's questionable because of what the Dutch is attempting to do. For example, the turnout for the vote in 2010, which designate Bonaire as a public body under the authority of the Dutch monarch, was merely 51%, barely meeting the threshold needed for the definition of a referendum. So we must question, was this referendum a valid one? In Canada some years ago, when the Quebec decided that they were going to have a referendum, the Canadian national government passed a law that stated that 51, anything under 51, anything 51% at 51% was not qualified. So here it is, they did not apply the same principle when it came to the situation Bonnier. This is hardly a testament to the exercise of the franchise as a matter of such existential importance as self-determination. It makes one wonder who was voting for who was voting for what, and at whose behest. The people of Bonnier know very well the colonial game, how Europeans rig the rules and manipulate the outcome to maintain the status quo. We saw this with the referendum in 2015. A new referendum of self-government, of self-determination could not be stopped because all the conditions had not been met. Yet, the Dutch Minister of Home Affairs and Kingdom Relations added the explicit provision that the outcome of the referendum could not change the constitutional relationship between Bonnier and the Dutch monarchy. So in other words, they make it literally impossible that even with a majority of people in Bonnier voting for independence, because of the constitutional arrangement, they're using this bogus argument to say you cannot attain independence. So self-government was off the table. Nevertheless, on December 18, 2015, 65% of Bonnierians voted and put on record that they were not happy with the current political arrangement with the Dutch monarch. The struggle against the monarch, the mighty, and the money of the colonial power is not going to be easy. We could see it in the case of what the French have done in Martinique and Guadeloupe to try and make a case that the conditions of the Africans living in Martinique and Guadeloupe is much better and part of France, and therefore using those kind of a justification to continue with the form of colonization. But it's a very difficult task, but it's not also insurmountable. It simply means that we have to be more vigilant and more determined. At the Global African Congress, we believe firmly in self-determination. We see our target as twofold. One, we must remind the people that the plantation economy is still alive and active. The form has changed, but the essence remains the same. In the case of Bonnier, the plantation is owned and operated by the Dutch government. The facts speak for themselves. At the time of emancipation in 1862, the colonial government had enslaved 6 times more people than the private capitalist individual planter class. What does that tell us in terms of the case of reparation? Vereen have stated enslavement, there is absolutely no statute of limitation, and therefore reparation is easy to make that case. To be exact, in the case of Bonnier, 607 Africans were held in government captivity compared to 151 held in private captivity. The owner of the plantation was not merely some private Dutch capitalist, it was the government itself. Is it any wonder that the same government is reluctant to let go of its holding today? Why would they want to? It is a very clear case of our reparation demands. Further studies indicate that the GDP of Bonnier has been on a steady increase since the current arrangement under the Dutch government. 370 million in 2012, 430 million in 2017. But the average, not the medium take-home pay, has over around 23,000 throughout the same period. So the question is, where is the money going? According to Statistics Netherlands, between 2011 and 2017, nearly 10,000 people came to settle in Bonaire, virtually all of them from Europe. During the same period, 77,000 Bonaireans left the island. European money is squeezing out the Bonairean from staying at home. That's a very, very critical issue that we need to sit down and begin to think about. And many of us need to be a lot more vocal with what's happening in the country and stand in solidarity and expose this kind of hypocrisy that is taking place in our region. The second task at hand, draw international attention to the plight of Bonaire. And I like the fact that Professor Vereen Shepherd have indicated a number of possible avenues at the United Nations, at other international forums, and solidarity. So we need to get the international players to play by their own rules. So we need to get into the United Nations mechanism. We need to utilize the process and to hold them accountable. The United Nations Charter 73, as I indicated, is very clear. We have the right to self-determination and independent to do so with great clarity and to pursue the path of sovereign Caribbean civilization with our own imagination of ourselves. We have the right to look at the Black African decoloniality and our people campaign around reparation goal to build a better world. So let me conclude by noting that fundamental to the reparation agenda is the emancipation of all our people currently under colonial bondage. It is not acceptable, and we need to be more vocal about the existing condition. The Global African Congress stand and will continue to help to pressure heads of state, international and local bodies like CARICOM, the African Union, as well as our NGO community, to stand in solidarity with the hope and aspiration of our brothers and sisters in Bonaire and wherever colonialization exists. I invite everybody, all of us here, you are cordially invited to join the Global African Congress family gathering next year, next September 21 in Ghana, when we will have one of the thematic area, the whole question of decolonization. And we hope that we could bring some light to the brothers and sisters on the continent. Because indeed, I think Bonaire might very well have been one of the very first colony, the very first colony from which Africa was stolen from the continent and brought to Bonaire for salt, way before the sugar and cotton became king. So to some extent, we have had a long-standing history of the colonization of the Dutch Empire in the region, and enough is enough for us to say, time to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you for your words. It was like looking in a mirror when you were showing giving the presentation, showing the PowerPoint. It was for us truly like looking in the mirror. Thank you.
Welcome.
I would like to invite Dr. Chenzira Davis for a summary of the communique of 2019. Dr. Chenzira.
honestly. Like, I'm really thankful because sometimes when we're doing multiple tasks, we know how the struggle works. So my intention was to show some of the slides, but I'll do that towards the end. And I'll just share the communique that is coming from the 4th symposium that answers just that, exactly what things have been prepared and planned, and the layer of organization towards getting things done. So this is the 4th symposium on the political future, the right to self-determination and reparations in the Caribbean. And this was during a meeting in Bonaire, West Indies on the 5th through the 7th of December, 2019. And the conclusions read as follows. 1, affirms that the referendum results of 2014 in Eustatius and of 2015 in Bonaire constituted a formal, genuine, and legitimate refutation of the public entity status as expressed by the people, and alarmed that the public entity status imposed on the people of St. Eustatius and Bonaire had been misrepresented as a genuine status of political equality by the government of the Netherlands in 2010 at the dissolution of the Netherlands Antilles. Point 2, deeply concerned that the people of Bonaire and St. Eustatius are presently being governed contrary to democratic norms under a political status of political and economic inequality, not of their choosing. Point 3, reaffirms the continued applicability to Bonaire, St. Eustatius, and Saba of relevant international law doctrine on self-determination and decolonization, including the provisions of Chapter 11 on the Declaration regarding non-self-governing territories. Point 4, also reaffirms the continued applicability of Article 73B of the United Nations Charter, which mandates that members of the United Nations which have or assume responsibilities for the administration of territories whose peoples have not yet attained a full measure of self-government recognize the principle that the interests of the inhabitants of these territories are paramount, and accept as a sacred trust the obligation to promote to the utmost within the system of international peace and security established by the present charter, the well-being of the inhabitants of these territories, and to this end to develop self-government, to take due account of the political aspirations of the peoples, and to assist them in the progressive development of their free political institutions, according to the particular circumstances of each territory and its peoples and their varying stages of advancement. And point 5, emphasizes the continued applicability to Bonaire, St. Eustatius, and Saba of the UN Decolonization Declaration, Resolution 1514, its companion resolution 1541, and all other relevant UN resolutions, as well as the present 3rd International Decade for the Eradication of Colonialism and its plan of action. Point 6 also emphasizes the applicability of relevant General Assembly resolutions, which recognize that the existence of colonialism in any form or manifestation as incompatible with the Charter of the United Nations, the Decolonization Declaration, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and further emphasizes the applicability of the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly, which confirm that self-determination is a fundamental human right protected under the core human rights conventions, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR, and the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD, et al. Point 7, takes notes with interest that the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 945 of the 15th of December, 1955, removing the former Netherlands Antilles from the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories, did not affirm that the former Netherlands Antilles had achieved a full measure of self-government, as stated by the government of the Netherlands in the Dutch Parliament on December 22nd, 1955, with the following statement. The emancipation process has been completed, thus leaving open the possibility for the United Nations to resume formal review of the self-governance sufficiency of the former territory and any of its former constituent parts, in particular, Bonaire and Saint Eustatius, as well as Curacao and the other semi-autonomous countries within the kingdom, with the aim of fostering a genuine process of self-determination. Point 8, calls on the government of the Netherlands as a matter of urgency to lift the financial supervision imposed on the Dutch administered Caribbean, and further calls on the government of the Netherlands to exercise respect in their communication and dealings with the territories and semi-autonomous countries. Point 9, condemns the government of the Netherlands for its actions in unilaterally embedding the so-called public entities of Bonaire, Saint Eustatius, and Saba in the Constitution of the Netherlands, and calls on the international community to review whether these actions are a violation of the inalienable right to self-determination of the people of the so-called public entities. Point 10, calls for the government of the Netherlands and or relevant United Nations member states to initiate the necessary procedures for the reinscription of the former Netherlands Antilles islands of Bonaire and Saint Eustatius and Curacao and the other semi-autonomous countries within the kingdom on the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories, to provide the international community with the required platform to review in depth where democratic deficiencies in the dependency governance arrangements may exist. Point 11, calls on the Caribbean community, CARICOM, to consider that the Caribbean is not in a post-colonial condition and to give due recognition to the issue of the self-determination of the remaining non-independent Caribbean countries in the region as unfinished business, and requests that self-determination and decolonization be placed on the permanent agenda of the CARICOM heads of government. Point 12, endorses the commissioning of an independent self-governance assessment of the political status and constitutional arrangements of Bonaire and Saint Eustatius through the use of the Corbin self-governance indicators to determine the nature and scope of the public entity status according to international standards, and request that the necessary resources be identified for the assessment to be carried out as a key substantive document to inform the United Nations in its consideration of the reinscription process of Bonaire and Saint Eustatius. Point 13, further endorses and supports fully the trajectory of Bonaire and Saint Eustatius for reinscription on the list of non-self-governing territories of the United Nations. Point 14, aware that the proposed Raizal statute, which was negotiated between the government of Colombia and the recognized representatives of the archipelago of San Andreas, Old Providence, and Santa Catalina, has been submitted to the previous Colombian Congress in 2018, and the new Congress, which convened after the congressional election of 2018, had been withdrawn by mutual agreement by the Raizal Authority and State Minister of Interior. And point 15, concerned that the state has not yet recognized the rights of the people to their ancestral territory and their right to self-determination as recommended by the Raizal representatives in the originally proposed statute. Point 16, once again urges the Colombian state to modify its constitution in order to recognize the inalienable right of the Raizal people of the archipelago to self-determination in accordance with international law, in particular, the United Nations Charter, UN Resolution 1541, UN Resolution 742, and relevant human rights instruments. Point 16, once again, point 16A rather, petitions the Colombian government to make the necessary steps to include the archipelago in the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories, NSGTs. Point 17 calls on the government of the Netherlands to adhere to the spirit of its charter to provide for the autonomous functioning of Aruba, Curacao, and Sint Maarten, Sint Eustatius, and Bonaire. 18, the political movements, Movimiento Cusa Primer and Pueblo Soberano, call on the government of the Netherlands to end the consensus laws of Curacao and to respect the vision and spirit of the UN Charter in the same way as it respects the Treaty of Lisbon regarding the European Union, and to implement the UN Charter on the self-determination of our people. Point 19 calls on the government of the United States to implement the UN Charter as related to the self-determination of peoples and to implement the 37 resolutions of the UN Special Committee on Decolonization, calling for the self-determination and independence of Puerto Rico. Point 20 takes note of the agreement between the territorial collectivity to the social forces and the French state for a referendum under Project Guyane, calls for the participation of international observers to ensure a free and fair referendum process, and supports the struggle of the Front Guyanais por un changement statutaire, the Guyanese Front for a Statutory Change. Point 21 also supports the struggle of the people of Guyana, French colony, to complete social and political emancipation, and in this connection, calls for the reinscription of Guyana, French colony, on the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories. 22 calls on the government of the US to facilitate the self-determination of the people of the Virgin Islands of the US, consistent with the relevant resolutions of the UN General Assembly. And what has been shared is the communique from the 4th Symposium on the Political Future, the Right of Self-Determination, and Reparations in the Caribbean, based on the meetings held in Bonaire last year, December 5th through 7th, 2019. And I return the lectern over to Brother Sidney Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Thank you very much. I would like to say thank you, sister. Thank you. I would like to invite Dr. Carlisle Corbin. Dr. Carlisle Corbin. Dr. Carlisle Corbin is an international advisor on governance and senior fellow in the Global Dependency Studies Project think tank. He is an adjunct professor at the University of New York and has served as an independent expert to the United Nations. He is the former Minister of External Virgin Islands government, the Virgin Islands US. He lectures on independency, governance, and self-determination, and is the author of numerous scholarly articles and several books. Dr. Carlisle Corbin.
Speak up.
Right, unmute.
Yeah. Everything, is your audio fine? No, is the audio fine?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I must say that I was blown away by this conversation. And I sat back and enjoyed every moment of it. I often articulate some of the same sentiments, and to hear it, that discussion being held, it gives a lot of energy to this battle that we are undertaking. I really appreciate also both Dr. Shepard and Dr. Thomas for their presentations, particularly bringing in the third element as well. And I think clearly, I'll just have a few comments to make in the interest of time, but certainly much has been said, and I just would echo what has been said and perhaps provide a bit more detail on some of the issues. But I think certainly that for our conference, we are bringing together the issues of reparations and colonialism, and that is something that is a very important dynamic to bring together. Of course, we have a history in this region of British, Dutch, Danish, US colonialism, French colonialism. In fact, we are probably, in fact, arguably, the region of the world in the smallest space with so many different political and constitutional arrangements of non-independence. This is particularly challenging for us, even to examine the nature of the relationships that exist among us and between us, and our inability in many ways to even communicate. So this is a very important forum, and I commend everyone for being a part of this. Of course, we in the region have gone through a period of emancipation, mainly, of course, beginning with Haiti in the early 1800s and then through the middle to end of the 1800s. But following that, of course, that was the issue of emancipation, physical emancipation. There were many of the countries later, particularly the smaller countries of the region that now comprise the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, became independent a bit later, and recognizing that they had gone through a very brief period of free association. And what is interesting is that Resolution 1541 recognizes free association as a legitimate option of full political equality. But the caveat here is that the free association model of the West Indies Associated States did not meet the criteria at that time for full internal self-government. There was a bit of residual impact, residual control maintained by the British, and therefore the United Nations did not accept that model. There are other models today that are much more modernized in approach that are probably more acceptable. But of course, given those independent states and given the rest of us are remaining, we are the non-independent Caribbean, and we can be grouped into three categories. The non-self-governing territories, the 6 British dependent territories. I know our colleague from Bermuda made reference yesterday to the issue of what is referred to now as overseas territories, but clearly it is dependent territories in the context of the actual reality. Of course, we also have the US Virgin Islands as the 7th non-self-governing territory. These are the territories that comprise a part of the United Nations list, of a formal list of non-self-governing territories. Of course, at this moment, there are 17. Up there had actually added a territory in 2013. That territory was the French collectivity of French Polynesia, which I had some degree of involvement in that reinscription process. The second category of which I would refer is the semi-autonomous category. And we know Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin South, as Dr. Rhoda Arundel always makes reference to. The issue there, of course, is that these countries were formed as a result of a political fragmentation process, beginning with the separation from Aruba, from the Netherlands Antilles in 1986, and then the subsequent breakup of the remaining islands in 2010. And this resulted in the 2 additional semi-autonomous countries of St. Martin and Curacao. Now, the phrase semi-autonomous is reflective of the reality on the ground, because there are, in fact, within the constitutional arrangements, very clear indications of unilateral residual and direct unilateral authority of the Netherlands in the intervention into the affairs of these territories. So the question of whether they meet the criteria for full autonomy is clearly at the very outset is examined and has been examined for Curacao in a self-governance assessment that was done in 2012. And that, of course, situation has even become more dependent in that regard. A very similar deficiency of autonomy exists in Puerto Rico. And I think that whereas Puerto Rico's title is that of Commonwealth, the reality is that they are no different than US Virgin Islands as an unincorporated territory. And this is something which also, at the same time, they are, as the Dutch administered territories, Puerto Rico is a part of the peripheral dependencies. They are below the threshold, below the level of a full autonomy, or in the cases of Bonaire, Ceiba, and Statia, they're below the level of full integration, but yet they're not allowed or not permitted to be recognized and discussed in the United Nations through the decolonization committee process, because in fact, they're not on the list. And the United Nations in this 2020 is very cautious in terms of how it deals with these issues, particularly the Special Committee on Decolonization, which we've had a long history with. Now, we also make reference, Dr. Thomas made reference to St. Bart's and St. Martin in his presentation, St. Martin North. And it's also the point being that those two were formerly dependencies of the Overseas Department of Guadeloupe. And they then went into a similar collectivity status as that in French Polynesia, and also in somewhat with respect to New Caledonia or Kanaki. Of course, the sufficiency of autonomy for those two, St. Bart's and St. Martin North, is still to be determined. But if any indication, there is any indication, the French model of autonomy is notoriously colonial in nature. And one of the things that was found in 2012 was through a self-governance assessment of French Polynesia was the basis for their being placed back on the United Nations list, where they had been removed since 1948. Now, we have also the third category, as mentioned, the integrated jurisdictions, clearly Martinique, Guadeloupe, French Guiana, but we also have what's considered to be partially integrated, and those are the three Dutch public entities, which we have discussed earlier. Now, there was reference to the fact that most of these territories are in varying stages of political and constitutional advancement. We know that there was referenda in Bonaire in 2015. There's a referendum prior to that in 2014 that has been referenced by Dr. Thomas. And in fact, what has occurred, of course, and I had occasion to serve as the advisor to the Island Council of Statia in the 2014 referendum. And it was very interesting to see how it was manipulated by the Netherlands, to the extent that the result was considered invalid, even as the subsequent Island Council passed a motion to accept the results, but the Netherlands denied that motion, because that motion was not in their interest, whereas other motions might be in their interest, and they'll accept those. In the case of Bonaire, similarly, in the 2015 referendum, it was clear that the current arrangement was effectively rejected, but once again, the will of the people was ignored. Now, essentially, collectively, we are the remnants of someone else's perception of empire. Our region has the most complicated array of such arrangements, as I said earlier, anywhere in the world. But this political scenario has not gone unnoticed in our region. Going back to 2009, the CARICOM statement to the United Nations on racial discrimination said the following, and I quote, "The continuation of contemporary colonialism, which continues to be stubbornly practiced in many countries of our region, where the inalienable right to self-determination is continually pursued by the people, but not yet attained." This is recognition of CARICOM at that time. Up to that point, and several years subsequent, CARICOM used to make a very, very strong statement to the Fourth Committee of the United Nations General Assembly, the Special Committee and Decolonization, Special Political and Decolonization Committee, which is a committee of the whole of the General Assembly. And that statement was very clear on recognizing the unfinished agenda of the United Nations that included the Caribbean dependencies. For some reason, that has no longer, the collective CARICOM statement on the agenda items on decolonization is no longer made. And this is something that needs to be brought to attention of our colleagues there. Now, many of these arrangements that we have, and there was a question asked earlier about what has been happening in moving forward. I think what has been happening is quite a bit of dependency reform measures, internal reform measures, but not equating to decolonization. I think if we look at the British territories, they have now modernized constitutions where they've changed the nomenclature from, say, chief minister to premier. They changed from legislative council to parliament. So you have except the power relationship between the territory and the cosmopole has not changed. And in some instances, it has reversed. So this is part of what we, Dr. Shepard referred to His Majesty Haile Selassie I in reference to the issue of illusion, fleeting illusion. And we also refer to the illusion of inclusion, because many of the territories have been duped into thinking that we are actually a part of the cosmopole. We've been transported somewhere to Europe or North America. And this is something that is a condition which we also have to become aware of. The issue of course, none of these internal political reforms are meant to be measures of decolonization. In fact, what they have become are measures to seek to legitimize the political and economic inequality that exists. Sometimes we ourselves are convinced that these dependency arrangements are legitimate modes of democratic governance. Of course, we have seen that this is very much a trap, and we have to ensure that we do not fall into a trap of dependency in perpetuity. Now, the late great Prime Minister Michael Manley once made the point that in order to emerge from such a trap, you first have to recognize that we are in fact in a trap. And a number of our leaders in and out of our governments and the private sector and in the NGOs community are beginning to recognize the trap that we are seeking to emerge from. The elected leaders of the British Virgin Islands quite recently have begun to be vocal in their cause for self-determination. And that is a very important point, and we need to support the British Virgin Islands in their vocal expressions, because of course, there's always a tendency to keep us, to divide us. So we have to be cognizant of that, I think. The Progressive Labour Party in Bermuda, of course, has been very clear on this for many years. Independence, for example, has historically been in the platform of their political party, but at the same time, they've also recognized the inevitability of independence. And my former colleague, the late Walton Brown of Bermuda, back in the year 2000, referred to the situation as new millennium colonialism, and that actually began at the turn of the millennium. Now we have many of our leaders that we will know who have been expressed very great clarity on these issues. Of course, Helman Wheels of Curacao, he recognized the trap and he gave his life in an attempt to lead his people out of it. We know of his assassination. Jocelyn Clemencia, also out of Curacao, was also clear on the question. Juan Mari Blas from Puerto Rico, who dedicated his entire professional life to challenging the US version of the trap. Claude Watty and St. Martin expressed similar clarity. Clive Van Putten of Statia, perhaps the clearest of all of us on these questions in current days, knows the trap well. And his colleagues, including Charles Woodley, who I'm looking at on the screen, and others continue to raise awareness of the people. We can speak of other modern day human rights defenders. We talked about that yesterday a bit. James Finney's, of course. Corinne Dufis is also with us from San Andres. Lodeska Livingston Steele of Providence, Raymond Charlotte, and Maurice Pignard of Guyane, and Dr. Rhoda Arundel of St. Martin. They're all very clear on this question. And they continue to confront the contemporary colonial condition in their respective countries with necessary clarity. Now, of course, Davika Besessar is our guiding light and keeping our eye on the prize through her efforts. And an educational mission from Bonaire and Statia was launched to CARICOM headquarters several years ago to begin the process of seeking the support of our region to place the issue of contemporary colonialism in the Caribbean on the CARICOM agenda. And that was also made reference to by Dr. Thomas. On this point, it is critical that CARICOM countries and those of the wider hemisphere in Latin America are engaged in this process, especially if there's going to be a successful approach to the United Nations, as some of our territories expressed their interest in doing. Bonaire, Statia, others Curacao have expressed their interest in doing this. So as the General Assembly of the United Nations is poised probably this week to adopt the 4th International Decade for the Eradication of Colonialism, the likelihood of its success in the Caribbean would be significantly enhanced by the strong support of the governments and institutions of our region. Now, these are, in closing, these are formidable challenges, and we have differing approaches and even differing aims, and we kind of got a sense of that yesterday in the discussion that we had. But certainly, our main aim is achieving the full measure of self-government and wanting the true democracy for our people. We can accomplish this through the process of self-determination, which is the next stage of emancipation for the non-independent Caribbean. In the words of the Honorable Julius Nyerere, father of independence of Tanzania, it is better to govern or misgovern yourself than to be governed by anybody else. And I end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carlisle. Corbin, thank you very much. We now reach the Q&A, and I would like to introduce Dr. Kenzira as the moderator for the Q&As, and we will, due to the time and time management, we will limit one question per person. We have a lot of audience, so one question per person. And we will have 15 minutes. We still have 15 minutes to 20. And so Dr. Kenzira.
Greetings. So we can streamline, I'm going to go to what I saw is, so Mr. Cornelius Wilson, I'm going to read the first question, or is that the one that you would like to prioritize? Because I saw that you had more than one in the chat. I can use the first one. Okay, fine, thank you. How can our movement make use or try to make use of the newly elected US administration, in case the VP-elect Ms. Harris being of interesting mixed ethnicity? Is not this the elephant in the room? And that was an open question to any of the panelists. Dr. Corbin, Chair Thomas, Dr. Shepard, or Brother Finis?
Maybe I could just say one quick point on that. The U.S. position on decolonization at the United Nations, for example, has been pretty consistent, irrespective of which party is in power. And that hasn't been very supportive. That's
Okay.
all I will say about that.
Okay, thank you for that. Any of the other panelists wish to weigh in?
Well, just to remind us that if we look on the list of countries that are before the UN as trust and non-self-governing countries, we see that the United States has the US Virgin Islands, they have American Samoa, and so, you know, they don't see, and of course Puerto Rico, even though Dr. Corbin has explained the status of Puerto Rico, but they would, to me, they would first have to show some commitment to their own colonies, and then show support to the others. I think the UK has the most, and so, you know, even though you're looking to the United States, I think lobbying the UK seems to be something that is urgent in my mind. And that's why the CARICOM support that Dr. Corbin and my friend Sikaya mentioned is so urgent. We have to find out why CARICOM is not as fervent in that as they used to be.
Thank you. Are there any other panelists that wish to weigh in to that response? Okay.
For whatever it's worth, the political discourse in the United States is changing. I don't know what the end result will be, but the nature of the Democratic Party has changed in terms of the force of Black women. So the question is, can we attempt to make some link with that sector of the population? In politics, nothing is static. Most of those African Americans are clear on the question of slavery. They're clear on the question of colonization. So to what extent we could mobilize and try to develop some kind of a working relationship and begin to put some pressure for them to put some pressure on the party internally. The Americans are recognizing the changing demographic nature of the American politics in terms of African American and Hispanic. So for whatever it's worth, it might be worthwhile exploring. We might not get there tomorrow, but you know, we should.
Thank you for those.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to the next question by our comrade from French Guiana, Maurice Pindard. And he asked, this particular question was for Dr. Corbin, from what independent countries of the Caribbean and South America can we have real support in order to be re-enlisted or return to the list on the UN, to return to the UN list on non-self-governing territories? Do you need me to say it again, or did I come across somewhat clear? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I can't particularly identify any country, but as I go back to the issue of trying to deal with it from a regional perspective, I'll just give the example of the reinscription of French Polynesia, which was led by the small states of the Pacific region, Pacific Islands Forum, which is the counterpart to CARICOM. The extent to which a regional perspective can be brought to bear, it also lessens the political pressure on an individual country, which may which in our countries as clearly are susceptible to such pressures. The larger states in the hemisphere, in South America, might be less susceptible, but certainly they also have their own political considerations to bear. So I go back to the issue of it being a regional and hemispheric issue. Yesterday we spoke of the fact that the hemisphere states should be familiar, and that should be an affront to them that this is going on in their hemisphere.
Thank you. And I'm looking in the other chat, and most of the it's really comments that are being raised more so than questions. So I'm going to humble and request that in the interest of time, and so that we can respect everyone's commitment to this wonderful gathering for the 5th International Conference herein, I will return. I do not see any other, I see other questions, but I do not see other questions that are geared to the requirement of one person, right? So I would like to just return it to you, Brother Sidney, so that we can prepare for the closing and respect everyone's time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kenzira. Thank you very much. I would like to ask anyone who has a question, ask the question.
Oh, I see one now. I got it. You're absolutely correct. As soon as you said that. Okay, this is coming from Reverend Buddy Larrier out of Barbados. The case for reparations is well made. My question is, why have we not tabled a resolution to the UU, I need clarity on that, in support of the proclamation by the World Social Forum of 2013 for October 12th to be designated as the International Day for Reparations? And that's open to any one of the panelists. Perhaps there's so much silence because you all gave so many different responses in 12 different ways, and we had a 10-point plan. We saw that was shared from the CARICOM Reparations Commission, the Global African Congress, another component.
Can you please repeat the question?
Of course. The case for reparations is well made. My question is, why have we not tabled a resolution to the UN in support of the proclamation by the World Social Forum of 2013 for October 12th to be designated as the International Day for Reparations? Okay. I guess that's one of those questions that requires more thought, engagement, and longer discussion than the 15 minutes that we've been allocating. I could see that. But did anyone want to weigh in on any recommendation of perhaps the designation of October 12th in that regard, or any other day?
Are we talking about a day of reparations? Or are we talking about a day of international reparations?
It says to be designated, I'll say it again, as the International Day for Reparations. And that's why the way it was posed, I realized that I'm saying UU, but I realized it's the UN in support of the proclamation by the World Social Forum. So it's about International Day for Reparations.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to say something about it. Okay, the October 10 for Bonaire of 2010, I think it was intentional because it was used to be called the Columbus Day, or the Day of Discovery of the Americas. So I think our life changed on the day when we were sent back in time. The little autonomy we had was reversed to complete what we are in now. So I think if we want to erase that that history from being colonized, I think it's a good intention, as a good way to use the same date to give a new meaning for us, a new meaning for a new road towards liberation and freedom and changing of our future perspectives. So I think it's a good intention to use the date to turn back our clock to the right perspective for the future. So I think I consider that as a good intention, and I think it should be taken seriously to work on that because they use it against us. Our people only remember now 10-10-10, October 10, 2010. That was the day everything changed in our lives on this island. So I think we should fight for that, to change it back, to give us our road to emancipation back. We're now back 100% colony. So I think it's a good thing for myself. Do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And one of the questions that has been put as well is for us to achieve full regional decolonization, we have to achieve a regional unity and we have to have a unified voice. How can we circumvent the existing policies that prevent official participation of some in the region in UN recognized bodies like CARICOM and the OECS so that we can all have a seat at the table in the fight for decolonization and regional unity? I'll read it again. Let me go to the question. How can we circumvent the existing policies that prevent official participation of some in the region in UN recognized bodies like CARICOM and the OECS so that we can all have a seat at the table in the fight for decolonization and regional unity?
There's a generation of Caribbean political leaders that was more strident and had more steel. You know, you mentioned Michael Manley, and I would call Michael Manley Fidel Castro, and even for what it's worth, Burnham, Barrows. There's a generation of leaders that they were definitely anti-colonial, and they knew the consequences. And perhaps one of the best examples where they illustrate that was knowing full well the might of the United States when they attempted to break the isolation of Cuba. Nevertheless, they did that, and did that with a great deal of courage, and have won that battle. Of late, in the last couple of years, we've seen, and especially at this time, I don't recall in recent history we have seen a group of political leaders who are with such coward act as the present one. They're easily divided. You know, because people go into these international fora, some are abstaining, some are not voting, some are ducking because just imagine that, for example, when Donald Trump, the most racist American president in recent time, they're all racist, but he was so vocal. And that embarrassing pictures of some Caribbean leaders sitting in a hallway waiting to get in his office. It's one of the most humiliating moments in Caribbean history in recent past. So I think what it is, we as Caribbean people have to be a lot more vocal. We have to be vocal. We have to express our dissatisfaction or disdain for that kind of behavior. So the struggle of Caribbean unity is not insurmountable. There was a time when, for example, in early days, Eric Williams was talking with all of the different language groups. Morris Bishop in particular was vocal, extremely vocal among the division along language line. So it's not that we have not had that history in our past. We have. The question is, why are we not holding the current batch of leaders more accountable?
If I could jump in here, moderator.
Yes, please do.
To say that As I said in my presentation, I'm appealing to civil society, NGOs, CSOs, advocates to make use of what exists. So I know that there are gaps. I know that there are leaders who are not at the table, or I know that there are leaders who are at the table and maybe they're not representing in the way that they should. But I'm saying there are ways in which those who are disappointed in the existing people who are there can themselves have a voice. And here is what I'm suggesting. The Netherlands, for example, should be coming before the CERD very soon. Had COVID-19 not been upon us, the Netherlands would have come before the CERD this year. When a country is coming before the CERD, NGOs, civil society, other advocates, human rights, you can send in what is called an alternative report, because the state is going to send in a report. But you can contact us. If you go to the CERD website, you will see how you can send in a report. You can also come to Geneva if you can afford it, or request a virtual conversation with the country rapporteur and with the committee, so that we can hear from you what the state might not bring to us, so that we can balance our examination of the state. So I'm just saying, use what is there. There are a few of us who are representing the GRULAC region. There's someone from Peru. I am there from Jamaica. And I believe there's one more person from GRULAC. I can't, there are new members now, so I can't recall who won the elections last year. So use what's there. And especially for this, for that decolonization committee. As I said, CERD has to send in a report. And the report is based on the petitions and other reports that committee gets. I am tasked with watching that committee and reporting to CERD. And 2 years straight, I have sat down following the conference and listening to petitions and reading petitions. So I'm saying, use what's there, even as we work on the gaps.
Thank you for those reflections. Yes, Dr. Yes, Dr.
Yes, just on, sorry, just on the point of the question regarding participation in international organizations. I think we do have a fairly extensive participation. For example, all of the British dependent territories are associate members, or in the case of Montserrat, a full member of CARICOM. Several Anguilla, British Virgin Islands are associate members, and Montserrat associate members of the OECS. All of us, as well as the US Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico included, St. Martin, Curacao are all part of CEPAL, ECLAC. Okay, so we have institutional governmental seats where we can utilize those seats. In addition to that, within those organizations, there are provisions for civil society to be a part of the discussion as well. And I think this has not really been utilized quite a bit. And of course, depending on the government and power of any individual territory, they either have a program of external affairs or they do not. And of course, this is a purpose of different governments changing. But so even in the case of ECLAC, Martinique and Guadeloupe and French Guiana are associate members of ECLAC. So there is this broad perspective, seats wherever we can have them, but we need to probably do a better job of utilizing those seats to bring our position to power.
Thank you very much for that. This has been a very informative Q&A session, and we know that this could go on for a few more hours. And in light of what has been organized by the illustrious team here, I'd like to turn it formally over for us to prepare to close to our MC, Brother Sidney Martin.
Thank you.
I'll put up my virtual hand clap for every one of our presenters. You know, I know we can't tell everybody go on mute because it could go a little bit wild, but at least let's show our support. You know, you can use your reactions. That's why they're there. You know, it's good to put up, you know, hands, put up some energy, because they really poured out a significant amount of information. And we definitely are very appreciative of what's been shared by our panelists. You know, Dr. Vereen Shepherd, as is customary, Chair, Brother Sakaya Thomas, it's good to see you as well, you know, as is customary. And of course, Brother Dr. Carlisle Corbin and our illustrious activist, Brother James Fenice. And so with that, I know we would like to move in the direction of closing out this really informative, very proactive and wonderful program. And we know we have more work to do. We know that we have more work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chanzira. I will give space to Mr. James Finish for the closing. James.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Dr. Shanzira, to assist us today in this very, very, I can say, informative, very, very enlightening afternoon, because we got a lot of good direction how we can keep going, and we will for sure take it, because we continue forward ever, as I said, right? So thank you, Professor Shepherd. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Dr. Carbon, for being of great support this afternoon to our peoples of this are still under colonial rule in the Caribbean. This is a very important step today, again, to continue forward to decolonize the Caribbean. And I think we are on the road. We are far ahead on the road. So thank you again, all, for joining us. And next year, we will have our 6th symposium. Yes, we will have it. This year, it was virtual. I don't know, next year, we will have it. So whatever, we will continue till we get through. This is a big task for all of us, but I see you're all committed. You are willing to help us. So thank you for your help. And thank you for sharing our message. Thank you, and au revoir. Ciao, ciao.
Well,
thank you very, very much.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.